Hello, this is Kent Holland with ConstructionRisk LLC presenting Design Build Risk Management. Next lesson is 15, Ownership of Plans and Specifications. The first case is Johnson versus Jones. And in this case, we deal with really a failure of the parties to ever come up with a signed agreement, but it's very interesting how the court analyzed this. First, a contract should really make clear who owns a design work product. In this case, after reaching a verbal agreement to design the renovation of a large home, the architect, Johnson, and the owner began negotiating a design-build contract, and each began performance of their respective obligations. The architect obtained construction estimates, prepared general demolition and construction plans, and completed several drafts of preliminary design drawings. The owner approved plans and paid for them. The owner then terminated the relationship with the architect before executing a signed contract, and then contracted with another architect and a CM firm who then used the original architect's work product to complete the project. Johnson, the architect, sued the owner and the successor architect for copyright infringement. The court looked at documentation of the contract negotiations and found that Johnson never intended to relinquish control of the drawings. Johnson had submitted several contract drafts to the owner based on AIA document, at that time it was AIA document B141, and the intended contract language was to read as follows, quote, "The drawings, specs, and other documents prepared by the architect for this project are instruments of the architect's service for use solely with respect to this project, and the architect shall be deemed the author of these documents and shall retain a common law, statutory, and other reserved rights including the copyright," etc. And I'll put the rest of the clause here for your reading. So what you see from that clause is that even though the parties never executed the contract, that was sort of the last word. That was the documents going back and forth during negotiation, and the court looked at that and said, you know, battle of the forms, that's what the architect intended to work under, and therefore its documents cannot be used without violating its copyright, and therefore it was entitled to recover from the parties based on copyright infringement. Let's look now at insurance issues. Lesson 16 of Design Build Risk Management. This is a complicated, complex area. The design professional that's doing a design build project may need professional liability insurance as well as contractor's general liability insurance, because arguably it has both types of liability. The contractor may have exposure for professional errors and omissions that arise out of its subconsultant design professional services, as well as possibly its own professional type services. It may work fine to have different policies, but perhaps there should be a single carrier that has both the GL policy and the professional liability policy, so that that carrier is going to take that claim regardless of which type of a claim it is. It's going to be covered by one of that carrier's two policies. Then there are other types of policies like the owner's protective professional liability indemnity policy, and there's the contractor's protective professional indemnity policy. These are all policies that anyone involved in these projects should be reviewing with their insurance brokers to determine what would be appropriate for their project or for their business. Let's look at traditional general liability programs for contractors, and then let's compare that to what might be needed in a design build context. First, a contractor on a normal project is going to be under a commercial general liability policy, and that policy is going to typically have one of three endorsements dealing with professional liability. The typical endorsement is CG 2243, and it excludes liability arising from design errors. So it's sort of a complete absolute exclusion of any professional liability. Then there is endorsement ISO form CG 2279, and it only covers professional services that are included within the construction means and methods. And then there's one more endorsement that is broader than that, and it's ISO form CG 2280. And it's the limited exclusion, it's contractor professional liability endorsement, and it covers bodily injury or property damage from professional services. So it is often used on a design-build type project. Now, under a CGL policy, the coverage A is for bodily injury and property damage arising out of third-party claims. It's not for your own first-party claims. Key exclusions when the CG 2243 is used is losses caused by professional errors and omissions. Economic losses from the insured's own defective product or other failures to do the work properly are excluded from coverage. Damages from professional services that are excluded in the CGL policy are demonstrated in a case of Omni Construction. In Omni Construction, Omni filed a claim with its insurance company for damages to foundations of the building next to its construction. The damage was a result of sheeting and shoring systems, and a subcontractor designed and installed the system for Omni. The insurance carriers of Omni asserted that the design of the sheeting and shoring is a professional service and therefore excluded under the CG 2243 endorsement. The district court found that the design of the system was actually means and methods and incidental to the construction of the project, and therefore decided that the damages were covered under the policy. But that was reversed on appeal, with the court holding that professional services were excluded because the professional services exclusion applies to all professional services, even those within means and methods. If we were to do a little case study on a contractor-led project, a design-build project, we might look at the owner on top, having a fixed price contract with the design builder. It's a contractor-led design-build project, so you have a sub-consultant underneath. And the question would be, what happens when the design firm delivers drawings late or with negligent errors, and the contractor is impacted by that and has to accelerate its work or has to do rework as a result of the delay or as a result of the errors? Is there any insurance for that? What's going to happen? Well, when you think about that, the contractor had probably a fixed price bid to the project owner, and it's still going to have to complete the job on schedule and at the fixed price, but it has now lost money because of the error of the design professional that it subcontracted to. If the contractor were to report a claim under CGL policy, clearly there's no coverage. If the contractor had a professional liability policy that protected the contractor from its own negligent errors and omissions in professional services, still quite possibly no coverage, because there's no third-party claim being made against the contractor here. The owner still gets what it wanted on time and for the same price. So what the contractor might need in this case is a contractor's professional policy with the indemnity portion built in, the way a number of carriers are providing today. And the indemnity portion would allow first-party coverage for the contractor to make a claim against the design professional that caused its loss. So that is an important thing, again, to discuss with a broker, is how do I get a contractor's professional indemnity policy so that I can recover directly from the design professional. Now, even if you didn't have that policy, as a contractor, you're going to be looking to the design firm, making a claim against them because they're in privity of contract with you, and you're going to be recovering from them, and they in turn will be tendering the claim to their professional liability carrier because it is based on a negligence claim against them. let's look at another case study. Let's say that we have a joint venture arrangement, and we have the owner on top. They have a joint venture entity underneath. The joint venture may be two JV partners that have, by teaming arrangement, agreed that one takes an 80% control of the project, like the contractor, and the design firm has a 20% interest in the project. And now the project goes along its merry way, but then a claim comes in, and it turns out that it's caused by, let's say, entirely by the design firm. The question then is, the design firm has insurance it'll go to, and the designer's professional liability policy is typically going to say something to the effect that the policy will cover the professional liability of the designer, including the professional liability that the designer has from its interest in a joint venture arrangement. The question would be, does that mean it's only going to cover 20% of the loss? Or if the loss was entirely due to the designer, will it cover the whole 100% of the loss? What if instead the loss was caused by some combination of the designer and a design error on the part of the contractor, and the contractor had his own design policy as well? Well, then you would look to both policies to pay their share of the claim. So the court theoretically would have rendered a judgment saying each party is responsible for this much of the liability, but it's joint and several liability. So hopefully the contractor's policy would pay its 50% share of the liability, and the designer would pay its 50% share, let's say. But what happens if one of those two parties either doesn't have enough insurance coverage left to pay a claim or enough assets to pay a claim? Then what happens? One could argue either way, and I've heard it argued either way, that the carrier for the other is still only going to pay what it would have paid for its insured's interest in the JV. On the other hand, one could argue that if a court is rendering a judgment that's joint and several, and consequently one of these parties ends up with 100% liability because the other party can't pay its fair share, then that's what the court imposed, was 100% liability. Therefore, why is its policy not going to pick up that 100% of those damages? I'm not giving you an answer on that. I'm merely putting out these are the different positions that get argued, and you should be aware of those, and you should talk with your broker and with your attorneys to determine how that might be resolved in your particular project, in your particular state. That concludes this program on design build risk management. I'm Kent Holland, ConstructionRisk LLC. Thank you for joining me for these lessons, and I encourage you to view each of them and use them for continuing education purposes. I'm going to put up slides here again showing how you can contact me, how you can obtain continuing education credit, etc. So again, it's my pleasure to be with you. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to being with you again on future programs. Goodbye.